Let's bring into the conversation now retired Marine intelligence officer and our friend Hal Kempfer with the latest on this. Hal, thanks for being with us to kind of round out the week here. I know you follow all of this so closely, but in Alex Hogan's report there, yet another hostage found in these tunnels in the al-Shifa hospital complex, this time an IDF soldier, her name Noah Marciano, and so I thought this was interesting because you and I have been talking about the hostages and this pending or possible deal to get them back. Bibi Netanyahu went on CBS News last night and he said this, Hal. He said, "We had strong indications that they, meaning the hostages, were held in the Shifa hospital, which is one of the reasons we entered the hospital." So, Hal, confirmation from Netanyahu, that's why they carried out the operation at al-Shifa hospital. That's still ongoing.
Andrew, he can talk about that now. Obviously, he couldn't have said anything about it before because, well, frankly, it would have tipped their hand as to what they knew and how they knew it. And so he'll talk about that now, but obviously they had clear intelligence. And of course, now what we're finding is, yes, they were holding hostages there. Two of them were killed. And it's, it's just it's tough. They got two missions. One is to destroy Hamas. The other is to get the hostages back, and those missions don't always line up. But that's one of the reasons clearly they went in there. Of course, the other thing too is they're also showcasing, basically shutting down the command and control node for Hamas, but also showing the world, if you will, what Hamas was doing. Because to use a hospital like that as a command and control node, to use a hospital like that as a place to hold hostages, or I'm sure Hamas probably thinks of them as prisoners of war, but a place like that is a clear violation of international law and the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
And so they want to make that very clear to the world. This is what Hamas was doing.
Yeah, Hal, I'm also citing some of this interview on CBS. Netanyahu also said Israel had intelligence indicating that Hamas had taken hostages from Israel to al-Shifa, but that if they had been there, Netanyahu says they were taken out before Israeli troops stormed the medical complex. I'm kind of reading here from the copy of the New York Times. They have a running blog here of updates on the Israel-Hamas war. Hal, they have this line, and I'm not sure you would agree with it. They have this in their copy. Israeli authorities have not publicly presented much evidence that Hamas used the hospital for military purposes. What do they mean by that?
Well, that's going back and forth. In fact, even among some intelligence officers here in the U.S., we're wondering if there's going to be more showing. There's been a lot of things that have been said by the IDF in terms of what they say they found. There hasn't been pictures yet. Now, in fairness, I mean, these pictures are shown, but in fairness, they can't get down some of those tunnels until they've cleared them. And they sure as heck don't want to bring journalists down those tunnels unless those tunnels are completely cleared. And I think there is a reasonable concern that those tunnels, certainly at this point, have all been booby-trapped, maybe set to have some sort of detonation underground at a certain time frame or something like that. There's a lot of things they have to look at with that, because obviously Hamas knew that they were going to be coming back to use those tunnels again. And so what their goal would be is to create as much death and destruction with those tunnels as possible. So I think they're being prudent in proceeding cautiously, although they are finding more tunnel entrances. I just saw about an hour before we've come on that they'd found another tunnel underneath there, and they say that tunnel is clearly was used for some sort of command and control thing, and that they're looking into it, but they haven't taken the journalists down there. So what that's done is it's caused this impression of, is it real or not? And I have to tell you, part of it is from Operation Iraqi Freedom with the WMD. I think there's a lot of journalistic skepticism anymore when these claims are made. Is it real? Because there was such a big sales job on the WMD in Iraq.
Sure.
And of course, that didn't quite roll out the way the Bush administration had explained it.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there's not speculation that there are tunnels and that they are used by Hamas. Just the fact that there are, tunnels underneath the al-Shifa hospital complex that are specifically used by Hamas for military purposes. I just want to make that distinction. Do I have that right? That's kind of the hair splitting here?
Kind of. There's tunnels, and there's no other reason that those particular tunnels would be there unless they're being used by Hamas. There's no other practical reason why they're there. But keep in mind, and I just say this, look, I don't claim to be an expert in this, but let's just say I've climbed through a few bunkers and we got in there and realized that everything was wired up to explode, and we had to crawl back out. Okay. You got to be very careful when you're underground like that, because they'll leave stuff out. In fact, they'll leave weapons. In fact, that's one of the reasons we looked in there, was because they had a lot of weapons and everything that were there. But when we paid close attention, we realized everything was rigged to explode. There was booby trapped all over the place, and that's the standard. That's standard. I mean, that's just warfare. That's just what's done. So they're being very, very cautious about that. One thing I would point out, though, with the New York Times assessment, and I saw this with more than just the New York Times today. Look, if they could be using that as a command and control node, and when they knew the IDF was coming, they could take everything down, all the maps, everything, grab the laptops, everything else, and skedaddle out there as fast as they can.
Okay.
The fact that there was as much found there as there was tells me that they had a lot there, so much they couldn't even carry it away. Okay. And that, to me, is an indicator.
Yeah, I mean, Hal, to your point, the New York Times piece goes on to say this: the armed wing of Hamas, the al-Qassam brigades, did not dispute that it had taken hostages to hospitals, but said it was not to hold them there. Quote, "We transferred a number of them to care centers to receive treatment due to the seriousness of their health condition and to preserve their lives," it said in a statement. So I guess the al-Qassam brigades release statements now, Hal.
Well, they do. And that's their story, and I'm sure they're going to stick to it.
Okay.
Everything indicates that that certainly at one of the hospitals, not al-Shifa, but at one of the hospitals, they actually found a chair with restraints. So whoever was there, whatever hostage was held there, obviously they're being tied to the chair. That's not a standard treatment procedure. And it's an interesting story. I think they took it there because that's actually where their big command and control node is. That's also if you want to hold hostages and you want to take them deep into the territory and you want them someplace where you would have maximum control. Should you be able to use them for some sort of trade, you would want them close. That would kind of make sense in Hamas's mind. Certainly at the beginning, early, October 8th, 9th, 10th, that would be their thinking, is take it in there, take them there. I don't know that Hamas fully believed that the IDF was going to go in and clear Gaza City. It had never quite happened before. It is a truly monumental urban warfare problem, right. And I don't think they actually believe they're going to do that.
Okay. Hal, I want to move on to some other aspects of this war here that, of course, is the increasingly dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. And I want to read this out. The White House put this out. So now we know President Biden has been on the phone twice this week with the Emir, the Sheikh there in Qatar. So the readout goes as follows. Biden spoke today with the Sheikh. The two leaders discussed the urgent need for all hostages held by Hamas to be released without further delay. The leaders also discussed ongoing efforts to increase the flow of urgently needed humanitarian assistance into Gaza and Israel's decision to resume fuel deliveries for life-saving aid. The leaders agreed to remain in close touch, including through their teams on these matters. Also, the principal deputy national security advisor, John Feiner, he's Jake Sullivan's deputy. He had a call today with the head of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees also on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. So, Hal, just this time last week, we were talking about these pauses daily, 4 hours a day for 3 hours. 4 hours a day, daily pauses there. Are they still in place? And if so, what's the holdup with getting some of this aid in?
Well, the aid seems to be getting into the south. The big issue that the UN has had is they want the aid to go up north. Now, today, my understanding is about 120,000 liters of fuel actually got in through I believe it's the Rafah Gate, and went through, and it's going to various locations in the south. Nothing is able to get to the north. Of course, the north is an active combat zone. I don't know at this point what the fuel situation is at some of the hospitals up there, because the IDF had actually brought fuel to the hospitals, and you may recall that Hamas had refused taking the fuel. And subsequent to that, there was some deaths in the hospital, which was clearly linked to the lack of generator capacity. Uh, I don't know what that status is right now with al-Shifa and some of these other hospitals up north, but they do need to get fuel in there. One of the things I think the U.S. is emphasizing very clearly with Qatar, which is basically our interlocutor with with Hamas, is the importance of releasing hostages. Hamas has been holding on to them. They did that initial thing up front where they did 2 and 2, and there was hope that this would continue. Right now, and then the IDF actually rescued a hostage as well. But now we're just finding, unfortunately, the bodies, the remains of hostages that died or were killed, I should say.
Yeah.
And so this puts more emphasis on the importance of releasing those hostages as soon as possible. It's also going to be very much telling as to how many of the hostages, and this is kind of gruesome, are still alive. Obviously, we know some did not make it, and from that we can probably presume that others did not make it. And so of the 237 potentially, we're not sure how many of those are still alive, and that includes the 9 Americans that are being held.
Hal, I just want to kind of clarify this as well. We're showing some tweets from the Israel Defense Forces about some of their efforts on the humanitarian front as well. But throughout the duration of this, Hal, the return of hostages has never been linked or tied to the humanitarian aid question. Now, that early on was somewhat on the table, but they've never been linked. This is day 42. Do I have that right?
Somewhat tenuous linkage. I haven't heard Israel per se link it quite that strongly, but I think it's pretty much understood that if you want a gesture of I mean, for the IDF, it's taking a little bit of operational risk. This was reemphasized again today by Netanyahu. I believe he was talking to NPR, was emphasizing that they send the fuel in, and they're concerned that some of it will be going to Hamas, and Hamas is going to use that for the war-making capability. And obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense from a warfighting perspective, to be supplying your enemy with what they need to fight you with, so to speak. But it does sound like fuel's going to start to go in. I don't know if it's linked to the hostages, but I will say this: it is a consistent, persistent message by not just Israel, but also the United States, the need to release the hostages. And so maybe those things do kind of overlap, just because they're being said in the same sentence a lot of times. I wouldn't say it's a conditional thing, although I will say that there are some things that Israel has made conditional in terms of releasing certain things. For example, a ceasefire has been linked directly to releasing the hostages.
Yeah. Hal, we do want to take the opportunity, though, while we have you on this Friday night, because February 22nd, 2022, you were on the air with us when Russia made it official and invaded their neighbor, Ukraine. The war has been going on ever since, coming up almost on the 2-year mark. And we showed that tweet there from Trey Yingst, day 42 in the Israel-Hamas war. We were doing the math here in the newsroom, and so now it's day 633 of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The counteroffensive still ongoing. We also just have some filed video as well of some of the war since you and I have spoken about it. And we wanted to make sure we got some updates on this from you, Hal. I know you send me things offline all the time and you follow this so closely. And I just want to read from some of the reports in the last couple of days from the Associated Press that you sent over, that a top Ukrainian official said its troops have established a beachhead on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River near Kherson. It's an important advance in overcoming one of Russia's most significant strategic barriers in the war. So now that top Ukrainian official, Hal, that's Andrei Yermak. He's head of the president's office. He provided no details to the Associated Press, but confirmed the development that had been widely discussed in military forums over the past month. And so he told the Hudson Institute when he was in Washington just earlier this week, he said this: against all odds, Ukraine's defense forces have gained a foothold on the left bank there of the Dnipro River near Kherson. Now, Hal, for those of our viewers who may have lost sight of the conflict, who might not have been following these updates daily like you and I have, how significant is that? And let's talk Turkey. Let's talk about how the counteroffensive is going on the Ukrainian side and whether or not they've put a lot of this American military materiel to use and whether or not it's helping.
Well, Andrew, and let me answer that last one first. Yes, everything that we have provided, they have put to some use. One thing is those ATACMS missiles, those long-range missiles that go out about 100 miles, they have been using those with tremendous effect, taking out command and control nodes, logistics nodes, also taking out things like airfields and a variety of other things that support the Russian troops on the lines. And they have created a tremendous amount of logistical and support uncertainty with the Russians. Now, the Dnipro River in Kherson, kind of go back, you may remember that dam, the Kakova Dam, the huge dam that caused the flooding that the Russians had blown up. That was in the fall, and that was basically, or I should say in the early summer, that was to basically block that entire frontage along the Kherson, along the Dnipro River. That was obviously one of the ways that Ukraine was probably going to, one of the avenues of approach, one of their main fronts that they were going to use. With that flood, it turned everything into water and then deep mud and silt. So they really couldn't do anything. Now the winter's come, the water has subsided, and they've had an opportunity to get a foothold on the south of Kherson City, on the east side of the Dnipro River. Apparently, the Russians have tried very hard to push them back. They haven't had a lot of success. There's been reports that the Ukrainian Marines have actually pushed forward quite a bit. It's not clear. I was looking just before we came on. I was trying to see if there was anything more graphic on the map that could tell me just how far they pushed. I don't know. There's been some rather interesting things. The Russians actually came out. It's kind of an interesting thing. It caught everybody's attention. Was the Russians put out an announcement saying they are repositioning their forces back along the Dnipro River.
Okay.
And it was like, that sounds like a lot like a withdrawal. And then they immediately came back and said, just disregard what we sent. That was nothing. Just don't pay attention to what they said. And I was like, that really sounds like they're having problems out there. So it sounds like the Ukrainians have got a good foothold. Now they're gradually moving in Zaporizhia. They're moving through that Surovkin line, but it's really slow go. There's just so much there. Interesting though, the Russians have taken some of the worst days in terms of loss of troops and in terms of loss of material, tanks and everything else. In eastern Ukraine, they've been trying to push this offensive. They have had no success.
Okay.
They are completely stalled. And this last week, something that didn't get a lot of notice, according to Ukrainian military estimates, over 300,000 Russians have been killed in this war. It's just, the numbers are staggering.
Yeah. Hal, last question though, and briefly if we could, but so this is what we know. There are two global wars really going on at the moment. Global wars, I should be specific, that have, captured the world's attention, I should say. And so I think my question to you is, yes, Ukrainian leaders, including Volodymyr Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, the leader of Ukraine there, he is deeply concerned about a waning interest. The attention is elsewhere on the Israel-Hamas war. And so I guess my question to you is, can the West, can the backers of Ukraine and Israel walk and chew gum at the same time? Can they give equal due attention to both conflicts or not? Does one supersede the other? Does one not get as much attention as the other? I mean, because you could argue Ukraine has not gotten the attention that it so rightly deserves over the past now, 42 days since Hamas launched their surprise attack there in southern Israel. How is the West going to handle this, do you think?
I honestly don't know. I will say that the European Union and the rest of NATO seems to be stepping up to fill the void. As you know, Congress is kind of stuck right now. They have not passed a bill to to re-up funding for Ukraine, and President Zelensky has also said that particularly artillery, but other ammunition, arms that they had expected to receive, they think was diverted to support Israel with its war, and so they're already starting to see that logistics strain, if you will, from the West. I just don't know. I think yes, it can be done, but I will say,
Are you concerned by it, though, just on a personal level, for talking about this and following it so closely?
I am concerned that Congress may stall out and not get this done, and they need to do it very, very soon, because that flow of ammunition and everything else is starting to dwindle noticeably. And there's a window of opportunity here for Ukraine to do something this winter, but not if the spigot's turned off from the United States. So politically, I am concerned. I think we can, industrially, I think we can support them, although we have discovered some deep problems with our defense industrial base that are being addressed right now.
Okay. Hal Kempfer, we got to leave it at that. We do appreciate all of your insight into now these two major conflicts happening on the world stage. Hope you have a good weekend, Hal. Talk soon.
Okay, you too, Andrew.